All right. Well, everybody, as promised, here we are with Tommy Angelo. Welcome to the RecPoker podcast. We
Thank
are
you, Steve.
officially, it's a pleasure to have you on, Tommy. And we are officially sponsored by Running Aces Racetrack and Casino. They've been with us from the beginning, sponsoring us, and it's been super exciting to be partnered with them. But, we talked to Eileen Sutton, and she said, hey, would you be interested in having Tommy Angelo on? I said, well, just a second. Let me think yes. And so she made that connection. And we're very gracious enough to respond and join us. So, man, welcome. And where are you calling in from? Where are you at right now?
I'm in Oakland, California.
Okay, and you're a transplanted. Now, you went to Ohio State? So, are you originally from the Midwest, or?
Yes, I grew up in Ohio. I lived there for 40 years, and I moved here to California 20 years ago to play poker. And I was already playing for a living for about 10 years in Ohio and traveling around to Vegas and Atlantic City. And then one thing led to another, and then I came out here and with 40 grand in 1998 and somehow haven't gone broke.
So have you ever had to, I don't like the idea of saying a real job because poker is work, but have you ever done anything from a career perspective other than poker?
I did. I had one actual job that I started. I worked at a grocery store in high school. Okay. Then I went to college for just a couple months, and then instead of going to college, I took up bridge. So during my college years, I played bridge all the time and nothing but bridge, and worked at the grocery store, and became a life master in 3 years. I held some kind of record back then for the fastest to life master at bridge. That was in 1982, and then basically quit bridge completely and randomly became a full-time musician.
Yeah.
So I've always played music, but then fluke circumstances happened. I was in a band. I lost my job. Suddenly I was playing music full-time. So that became a 10-year career as a musician. During that time, I was playing poker as much as I could, always studying, learning. I got a hold of Skalinsky's stuff, in 1987. And in Columbus, there was a big circuit of underground games that I started playing in. And so in 1990, I left the band and became a full-time professional poker player. So I played in those private games in Columbus for 7 years, going out every night at 7 o'clock, playing until 4 or 5 in the morning. Smoky, nasty, drugs, everything. I mean, it was very seedy situation. And then I started running games in Columbus illegally and got my bankroll built up running games. My game got busted, which I knew it would. And then that's when I flew west to California in 1997. To play poker at Artichoke Joe's in San Bruno, and then Lucky Chances opened right down the road. So I've lived on the peninsula most of my life and played at Lucky Chances, Artichoke Joe's, Bay 101.
Now I know because I saw that you're a musician. I've heard that before. I didn't realize it was actually a full-time gig. So
it was 10 years.
So what are we talking about? What kind of music are we talking about?
Country and rock. That's what I played. Country and rock. And I've played 3,000 gigs. About half of them on piano, half of them on drums. And I also play some other instruments, but I still play a lot of music now. I really enjoy that, not professionally, but just for funsies.
So what's sort of the common theme through that? So you have bridge, and you have music, and you have poker. Is it the mathematical mindset? Are you a very logical mathematical approach, or what's kind of the common theme? Or do you see those as very different things?
Well, no, actually, there's the bridge, came and went, but the other thing that's been there throughout my entire life is writing. So the three things that I've done nonstop since I was 8 was music, cards, and writing. Okay. So all three of those have become careers by some fluke circumstance. So the last 15 years, that's probably primarily what I've been doing is writing and coaching. And but the thing they have in common is that they are art forms to me, including playing poker. Playing poker has become purely an art form. And by that, I mean, everything in any way you might define, what is the artistic process of creation, of trial and error and coming up with tons of ideas and throwing them out and constantly changing and revising nonstop. And then eventually saying, okay, this is done, but I'm going to move on to the next thing immediately. That artistic process is how I've treated my poker game. And even more so in the last 10 or 15 years, because once I started meditating about 15 years ago, I developed a discipline to do anything I wanted. So I have the control right now to do any experiment I want to at poker. I could go in and decide to 3-bet every pot I ever played if I wanted to. I have that discipline. So that has allowed me to carry on some pretty crazy experiments. And I also get more experiment data by the coaching I'm doing. So like a lot of some of the stuff we might start talking about is how I've been coaching a very positionally centric mindset and action with my clients, which mirrors how I play. And it's just every one of these guys that does it. And I say, this is an experiment, try it. They come back and they're like, oh my God, I wish I could rewind the last 10 years of my life. Because they're just like, we're going to get to it. But there are some easy things that anybody on earth that plays poker can do that I truly now believe, because of all the experimentation, will improve anybody's poker game, especially if they're not already a professional.
Yeah, I can't wait to dig into some of that. I mean, I love the stuff that you've recently been doing on Twitter where you put up the memes and you're just like, if you're in the small blind, just fold. You know, I mean, all of these sort of, if you think you're beat, just fold. Some very obvious things, but yeah, we'll dig into some of that. So kind of, you move west with your bankroll, and you're playing a lot of poker at the time. Maybe let's just speed up a little bit to like where you are today, because I know you don't play a lot. At least you don't play a lot live. You're really focusing on your coaching and your writing and those sorts of things. Talk a little bit about just your transition from playing most of the time to focusing on other things. And do you miss the game? Do you miss that part of the game? Or talk kind of what was the transition like for that?
Well, this transition sounds really strange, but you have to understand that I changed a lot from 2003 when I started meditating, and then 04, 05, I started coaching in 04. And so the way that I enjoy poker now is different than the way I used to enjoy it then. I used to enjoy the more traditional sort of frenzied, ego-driven, gambly, sort of just gambling, right? Poker. I mean, even playing type for a living, there's the thrill and the excitement of it, right? Now, it isn't so much of that. I get my enjoyment from playing really, really well all the time and being completely focused on every single street of every single hand. And that's my objective, is to never leak even for one hand the rest of my life. So I've gone kind of to the other extreme in terms of where I get my joy. I only play about 100 hours a year now. I typically go to Vegas for 5 days and just play. I rarely play locally. When I go play, I just go to play because I like to have unlimited time in front of me. That allows me to play weeklessly. So what happened was in 04, I started coaching. 04, 05, I coached Phil Galfond, David Benefield, and some other heavy hitters back then.
Yeah, never heard of any of them, no.
So, a few others. And so they said some nice things about me in the nosebleed circuit, right? Yeah. So they stopped playing and coaching completely in 2006 to write Elements of Poker.
Yeah.
Which was basically all the stuff I had collected my whole life and wrote that book. As a result of that, people who hired me subsequently could read the book first, and they knew where I was coming from. And so the efficiency of my coaching got a lot better. And because Phil and those others had said nice things, I had plenty of clients, I don't want to name drop, but, some other big hitters. And I was coaching a lot of professionals. And so then around 2009, 2011, Black Friday kind of killed everything. Right. But even a year before that, I'd started writing Painless Poker, which was a book that took me 7 years to write. And I made a decision to stop coaching for about 5 years and write that thing. And then I did that. And so then when Painless Poker came out a couple of years ago, now I've moved back into coaching a lot. And I changed my model. It used to be I charged 10 grand and it was a huge investment in terms of the trust and effort that we would put into the relationship, right? We'd spend a week in Vegas together and then do a lot of follow-up coaching. Now I've changed it all together because of this technology of Zoom and self-scheduling. Now what I do is half-hour or hour calls like this with clients. And you can just go to my site and schedule it, and it's $100 for a half an hour. So there's we can hit the ground running. People write to me, they tell me what they want to talk about, whatever they want to say, and then off we go. Sometimes it's a one-off session with somebody, didn't gel or whatever. Sometimes, I have quite a few guys I talk to every couple of weeks or every month. Just depends. So this model for coaching has been really wonderful because it's kind of brought me back to my roots, which is low stakes and medium stakes, which is where I made my living, as a play. It was medium, right? Medium stakes, limit, hold 'em, medium stakes, no limit. So now I'm coaching a bunch of 1-2 players and 2-5 players, primarily at live cash games, and loving it.
So what do you love about it? Like what what is that drive? Like,
Oh.
because you could either be playing or you could be coaching. And is it, obviously there's a, it's more of a fixed income and there's a financial piece of it. But what is it about coaching that you love? Or even like this, where you're, you don't have to do this. I'm not paying you to do this.
Yeah.
You're investing in the poker community with your knowledge. What is it about that kind of motivates you?
I love teaching and learning both, equally. And so teaching, if somebody writes me a letter and they're like, okay, I'm suffering over poker because of X, Y, and Z, and then we make any kind of progress, okay, that's immensely satisfying as a teacher. And that's what drives me.
Yeah.
And another part of it is, this is a little bit fluffy, but, I've been very, very fortunate to have survived through some really mucky parts of my life and come out well. I'm 60, I'm well-funded, really healthy now. And I'm extremely grateful all the time for the paths I didn't go down. And so I really want to pay it forward. I do want to give back. So the idea that I can give back in some way by way of teaching and still make enough money at it to basically fund the ability to teach more is like a dream situation.
I love that. I'm a pretty fluffy guy, so you're in good company here. You're just fine with that deal.
Okay, good.
So you talked about, you started getting into meditation around, I forget, 04 or something like that, which is a common theme among a lot of players that we talk about, we talk to now. So I guess as you think about that, I know you've written a book actually on meditation. I think your last book is on meditation. When you think about that, how much has that improved your game, or is it more of, it's improving my life and kind of my life focus, and there's just sort of an indirect application of my game? Can you kind of separate that, or talk to poker players about, I guess, how that's helped you?
Sure. Well, you could say it's helped me immensely, but there's two distinct aspects of my game and other people's games that go up. One is the betting itself, the strategy. The ability to put into play the strategies that you've thought about in the car or whatever, without being in the fog and without being, just remaining focused on purpose, right? But what I mean by that is the only way I can stay purely focused in a poker game, even after all these years of meditating, is to put out effort. It never, ever, ever happens just accidentally. No, I mean, it does. For non-meditators, we spend times of pure focus, right? But if you want to be focused 100% of the time, that takes effort, okay? Because what it means is you're going to lose focus. And by focus, I mean any kind of distraction, watching a basketball game or feeling dissatisfaction because you lost a pot. We're anything, right? So anytime any of those things happen, you're a little off whack, and you need a tool to come back to focus. And what that tool is doing what I'm doing right now, which is great. Exhaling consciously and saying, okay, I'm aware I'm upset right now because that asshole beat me a pot, or I'm aware that I never should have bet that stupid game in the first place. Whatever it is that's getting in the way of good poker, you label it. And then what this does is it's a percentage play. It increases the probability that negative thought will negatively affect your next poker decision. So it's a non-stop resetting process that the mindfulness and the sitting up and breathing does. In fact, that's how I define a successful session now, is how well did I watch the action? My goal is and I'm extremely distractible. That's the reason I've worked so hard on tilt and all these issues, is because I was such a tilt monkey. Right. You're seeing the end product here. But I'm still very distractible. I have to put effort into staying focused in a game. But I like that part. I like working at it.
I love that. So I've got a million questions. I want to make sure I leave a room for anybody in the panel have a question at this point on kind of what Tommy's covered, where he's going. Chris?
Yeah, you mentioned one of your goals in both your own play and working with students is to help them play leaklessly. And so I'm curious, what are the biggest leaks that you see in players, especially ones that you're coaching, that maybe anyone who's listening could work on?
I'm so glad you asked that. So basically, we're going to break all leaks into two kinds: pre-flop and post-flop. Okay, and the flop and the leaks I talk to clients about, and that I base my game on getting rid of, are the pre-flop leaks. specifically, because those are the most easy to specify and get rid of. So I'm going to give you the long answer to this. So in Elements of Poker, there's a thing called the Universal Starting Hand Chart, and it's a grid, and it's basically you decide. You go through each pre-flop situation, like one razor, I'm in middle position, and you decide what are the worst hands I should ever play. So let's look at the simplest one. Under the gun, deep stack, no limit game. Let's say it's a tournament. It could be like the early rounds in a deep stack tournament. You're under the gun. Everybody here, I believe, believes that they should always fold 7-deuce offsuit in the first hand of a tournament every time, right? Under the gun. So that's now I'm changing the whole structure of the worst hand ever play thing from Elements and modernizing it because of the new to the poker world, the 13 by 13 starting hand chart grid. Okay, so now and this is going to come out in a couple articles in the next couple months. The term I'm using is auto fold range. What is your auto fold range? Okay, so once you start thinking about an auto fold range, say under the gun, then the other hands are your it depends range. Okay, so most strategy talk that we talk about, all we're ever talking about is the it depends range. Okay, I got ace-5 suited under the gun. Should I play it or not? Well, it depends, right? You definitely shouldn't always fold it. Like you're never going to decide I'm always going to fold that hand. But you are always going to fold 7-deuce offsuit, 8-deuce offsuit, right? So by separating out into the auto fold range and it depends range, it takes all the thinking about how to play the hands out of the discussion. All we're looking at is what do you think you should always fold? For example, it's folded to the big blind. He's raising 100% of the time, okay? It's folded back to you. You're in the big blind. You're playing live. Well, let's say it's first round of a tournament, okay? Do you think you should always fold Jack-7 offsuit?
You mean small blind?
Big blind. It's going to be heads up, you against the button with 100% range. What hands do you think you should always fold? Now, you don't even have to ask it. See how your brain's working right now? That's why this exercise is awesome. And that's why any of my clients that do it, they come back and they're like, this is changing everything. Because it forces you to ignore every bit of input you've ever learned from the rest of the poker world. It's you alone in a room with a piece of paper, and you have to decide, I'm in the big blind, the button opened, he has 100% range. What hands should I always fold for the rest of my life? Player independent. That's the beauty of this thing. It's player independent, right? And anybody that does this, they're going to keep coming upon these lines. It's like, Jack-7 offsuit, Jack-6 offsuit. Once you draw a line, it doesn't even matter where you draw it. Then the next time you're playing, when you're in that situation, and you've got the Jack-6 that's right below the line that you decided on, you're like, well, if I play this hand, that's a leak. Now I'm back to your question. You have personally defined a leak. In this case, we're going to say, if you play Jack-7 offsuit, it's okay. If you play Jack-6, that's a leak. That is black and white, no gray area, and you decided on it. And that's what I mean by playing leaklessly before the flop, is you figure out where your leaks are and try to stick to them. Then you can change it, right? You might go down and play, and you're like, I think Jack-6 offsuit or Jack-7 is too weak. I'm going to raise my bar to Jack-9. And then you go change your chart.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So it really is, instead of kind of everything as it depends, you're really just sort of carving out that piece. And so that's one of your leaks is, so you're kind of defining leak there is anytime you breach your own personal.
Right.
Yeah.
What else can a leak possibly mean? I mean, think about it. A pre-flop leak. Can you go up to Matt Matros and say, hey, tell me what my pre-flop leaks are? I mean, define them? No. Only you know if you think you should be playing ace-5 offsuit under the gun or not, or wait for ace-5 suited. So that's one of the things I've been doing with my clients has been very successful, and it's been going so well that I'm writing a whole bunch of stuff about it. So I'm going to have an article coming out called Auto Fold Ranges, a tool for fixing your poker. And it's going to be at my site eventually at Poker News, and it's going to have all the instructions with the charts you need and everything you need to do this exercise.
And can you talk about, because one of the things I'm really fascinated that you talk about that I don't hear a lot of other people talking about, in fact, you wrote an article about it, but is the idea of being able to plug those leaks with the concept of waiting for straighters. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you can just talk through what that means and how you apply that.
Sure. So Waiting for Straighters is a recent book of mine. It's a short book, and straighter is any hand that can flop a straight. So like we were talking about, that's why I was talking about Jack 7, Jack 6. That happens to be a line I use because Jack 7, you can flop a straight, Jack 6, you can't. So you were talking about using the Waiting for Straighters to help plug leaks. So the idea there is the power of the straighter versus the non-straighter is in not just the flopping the straight, but flopping a straight draw, backdooring a straight draw, all the equity advantages that come in. So for example, if you have Jack 6 and you flop a pair, you have 5 outs to improve. If you have Jack 7 and you flop a pair and any of the other cards is a 9, 8, or a 7, you've got other equity in this hand. That's legit, right? It matters. And a lot of the big pots swing on who has those backdoor outs and those backdoor draws, okay? And so the idea of using Waiting for Straighters specifically to plug leaks is to wait for straighters in those situations where you're about to play specifically a suited hand that has a big gap. So the example I gave is actually a pretty good one. So let's say the button opens, wide range, comes around you have Jack 6 suited in the big blind. Okay, and if you call, it's going to be heads up. I'm a huge proponent of folding here. The suitedness, and there's several pieces of this, but the suitedness itself has far less value out of position. Okay, so if somebody doesn't know that, they need to understand that. In other words, the difference between Jack 6 suited and Jack 6 offsuit when you're going to be first the whole way is not great enough of a difference to turn a fold into a call. Okay, that's really important. However, Jack 7, and I'm not saying you should call in this case with Jack 7, but waiting for a straighter. If somebody does that all the time, they throw away those big gapper hands in the marginal out of position situations, okay, and wait for a straighter at least then you're always going to have a little bit of that backdoor equity going for you. You know, that's part of it. And back to your point about the leaking, if somebody is the type of player who does find themselves playing these spaced out suited hands without an ace out of position often, then which is, I believe, a really huge mistake, then Waiting for Straighters is going to make them fold more. So that's ultimately what plugging leaks comes down to. I mean, that really is lowering your VPIP. It really ultimately comes down to nothing more than that. There's not a single person I've coached that isn't already a professional whose score would not go up immediately if they did nothing, absolutely nothing but fold more before the flop.
You'd say that's true in tournaments as well as cash games? Is that Tommy?
I can't be certain, but probably.
Yeah.
You know, tournaments are different. At least in the early rounds of tournaments, I'll say yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about? I know you're a big position guy as well. You've alluded to it a couple times already, and you talk about opening ranges pre-flop. Obviously, by position should make a pretty significant difference. But I'd love to hear kind of your perspective on that, because I think we've heard it a few different ways. Where the percentage that you open typically under the gun versus the button, sometimes that's an incredibly wide gap. Some people would say, and sometimes people would say, well, it's certainly it increases as you get to the button, but it's not as dramatic. Kind of how do you as maybe you're not thinking about your opening ranges as much as you're thinking about the auto folds. Right. How big of a gap is that when you're talking about opening pre-flop?
I believe I have the biggest gap in the world. Okay, for anybody that doesn't play 100% button range all the time, my auto fold range in the early seats is 93%. The only hands I play are pocket pairs and ace king. I fold ace queen suited 100% of the time as opener. If I'm first in the pot, if somebody else is in the pot, my auto fold range is 42%. It goes way down. Okay.
Yep.
As soon as one of the person's in the pot, even in early positions. In other words, I got to be behind somebody. Okay, or I got to have a hand. My auto fold range on the button is only 34%. So I would play all hands with an ace, all hands with a pair, and every single straighter, right down to 6 deuce offsuit, the worst possible straighter. Okay, so my range, my it depends range under the gun is 7%. My it depends range on the button is 66%.
Yep.
And I use that button range from the cutoff if I look left and I think the button is folding. And I use my button range from the cutoff if anybody else opens the pot. So I'm super positional, but the reason I play that way, it's not because I think position is a good idea. Okay, it's way beyond and deeper than that. Okay, in every heads-up pot, every played in the world, one person has a huge advantage and the other person has a huge disadvantage. That's just the nature of the game, right? And there's no way around that, right? So if I'm in the blind and I've got a marginal hand and somebody raised, and I'm faced with the option of paying money out of my net worth to give this guy the opportunity to be last on me on the turn and river, which is the only bad thing there is in poker, is not being last. I mean, it's like there's no matter how I say it, it's like so obvious to me that the game is like almost unfairly easy if you raise your what I call act last percentage way up. So I act last on about 80% of the streets I play, which you think about is just kind of ridiculous, right? What makes that possible is that when 6 people limp and I've got like king 7 suited in the small blind and I'm playing 1-2 and it costs me $1 to call and 7 people limp, I fold 100% of the time for life. Okay, so what that does is I'm not playing all those crappy hands out of position, not knowing where I'm at or what's going on. I get to take a little break before I get the button and cutoff, which is why I showed up in the first place. And my act last percentage goes way, way up. This is the reciprocality thing because everybody else in the world is going to play that hand in that situation. Everybody, right? But I never play it. And so that means the number of streets that I'm acting last on overall goes way, way up because I'm folding the one hand where I always act first. My complete, I auto fold 78% of my hands from the small blind, even if there's no raise. I mean that, and I have an article where I make a claim that I might be the tightest player in the small blind that's ever played and I do that. And I'm not saying other people should do this.
Right.
I'm just saying that I'm still making money playing like this. It's still as crazy as it sounds. Right. So all I suggest to people is at least try folding a little more in the small blind than you do now and see how it feels. I mean, give it months. I don't mean like, a couple times.
Do you think go ahead. No, go ahead, please.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to ask, do you think part of that, one of the things that we talk quite a bit about position, especially for beginning players, and obviously part of that is the information thing, but part of that too is just you're unable to extract value when you have hands too, right? Is that part of the equation, or kind of what would you say are kind of the biggest components of why position matters so much to you?
Oh, well, not to me. It matters to everybody.
Right.
The advantage of being last is there, even if you're a terrible player. It doesn't matter how good or bad anybody plays. The advantage of being able to check behind on the river, just that alone, right? Mm. I mean, you're on the river and the other guy checks. Okay, if you've got a good hand, you get to pick your price based on all this information. And if you've got a bad hand, if you have no hand, you get to decide whether to bluff or not. But you already know that he checked. When you're out of position and you're bluffing the river, you have absolutely no idea, right? To me, it's like it's night and day difference. It's like, why in the world would anybody ever want to play any pot out of position when all you have to do is just wait a little bit and you get to be last? Yeah. I didn't really answer your question.
No, you did. I mean, that's okay. Really it. I know we've tried to break it down a little bit to try to explain to people. It's not just because you have additional information, but there's other pieces of it too. When you have a big hand, how hard it is to extract value. You flop a set, it's very hard to extract value when you're out of position versus when you're in position. The converse is true too. It's much easier to lose a big pot or to lose value or whatever when you're out of position.
And the draws are the ones where you end up paying more to get there, and you make less when you do get there.
Right.
Way less.
Right. Because
like
the checkbacks, yeah.
The example I'm waiting for straighters I give is like, let's say you got ace queen suited and you flop 2 overs and a flush draw. And if you're first to act in a 3-way pot, it's like you're kind of happy with that flop, but you're still kind of uneasy, right?
Right.
But if you just picture yourself with that same flop, 2 overs and a flush draw, last to act with 2 other players, nothing's better. Yeah. So all you have to do to make sure that that's your whole life is just fold the early position hands. Nothing. It's that simple. So what I do is I play what I call showdown hands, which means pocket pair and ace king. And with those hands, I know before the flop that I can go all the way to the river if I want to, right? So let's say I'm playing against the 100% guy on the button, and I've got ace king in the big blind. This is how I'll often play it. Let's say I'm playing cash game. He's really reckless, really, really gambling, and really bluffy. I'll call the flop with I won't 3-bet. I'll just call before the flop, and no matter what the flop comes, I check call. I snap check call. And then when the turn comes, I check, and if he bets, I might check, I might call, I might fold, I might check raise. But I'm playing my ace king for value now. I mean, chances are I still have the best hand, right? And I have a pocket pair. So, but I always have those hands. Not sometimes, always. And so every time I'm in one of these heads up out of position pots against a raiser with a wide range, I always have a hand I can go to the river. Mm-hmm. But if I start with like 9-8 of clubs, when it gets to the river, I got nothing. I either have to throw a bluff out there or just check, fold, and give up. Right? I just hate that. And so I don't do it anymore.
That's good. Chris, did you have something?
Yeah, can you talk about, the position thing is really, obviously I'm a big believer in it, and I really like hearing you talk about it because you make it so simple to understand. But it's really trendy these days. All the kind of poker strategy, people talk about defending your big blind, but you're almost always then out of position. And so I'm wondering what you think about the big blind and how you talk about that with sort of your positional awareness.
Yeah. So I learned to fold the big blind around 1991. Now, back then,
he knows what year he learned to fold the big blind, people.
Oh, yeah. I marked it on my calendar. And this was limit hold'em now. So now in limit hold'em, and this was all everybody played in the 90s, right? And limit hold'em, it seemed even more crazy to fold the big blind because you knew exactly how big all the bets were going to be, and you could actually run odds and do way more accurate sort of projections than you can now. But really, here's where it came from. It came from watching professionals. When I first started going to Vegas and started playing against real grinders and real pros, and I would just watch them. We're playing 20-40 limit hold'em, right? So you got 2 chips out in the small blind, and they just fold for 2 more chips, or somebody would raise, and it comes down to the big blind, only costs them 4 more chips, and there's like 12 chips out there, right? Fold. And I couldn't believe it. I was in shock. And so once I started doing it, I realized, well, this is really awesome. It was really great for my game. Then it took a while to understand why. But so what I do now is I fold the big blind to a raise pretty much 78% of the time. I mean, my calling range to a single raise in the big blind is pocket pairs, ace king, plus king queen. Oh, no, I'll go down to ace 10. I'm sorry. Ace king, ace queen, ace jack, ace 10. I don't always play those, but that's my it depends range when calling a raise from the big blind. And then I just always have a hand. The way I look at it is the default is to fold because of position, period. If the cards force me to play, then I'll reluctantly see the flop.
So do you feel like at the end of the day, do you feel like you're kind of playing your hands face up then a lot? I mean, do you feel like you're able to be exploited a bit because people know you're only defending with king, queen, or better, pairs, that sort of thing? I mean, it feels like it's hard for you to get value, or is that not your primary concern? Your primary concern is protection of your current assets.
This is the beauty of it is that first of all, you got to play with somebody a long, long time before you were sure that their range was that narrow. I mean, we're talking about the narrowest range ever, right? So, but
if I see you fold your big blind, 6 straight orbits to a min raise, I'd start going, okay, this guy is super tight.
Fine. Okay, so here's the deal. So let's go back to limit hold'em days, because this is how we discovered this. Okay, it was very easy. Let's look at the combinatorics, which didn't happen back then. But let's say that you know for sure that somebody's opening range under the gun is ace king plus aces plus kings plus queens. That's it. Okay, you would think that would make them easy to play against, right?
Right. Yeah.
But it doesn't. So let's give you pocket fives. Okay, so that player opens under the gun, and you call with pocket five. So you're in last position in a heads-up pot, and you absolutely know. Right. Is ace, king, aces, kings, or queen. Well, it's roughly 50-50.
It is,
when the flop comes deuce, deuce, deuce.
Yep.
You're 50-50. You have no fucking, excuse me, you said no X on. You have no idea where you're at.
You just saved me a little bit of editing. Thank you for that.
No, but the point is that the whole idea that having a narrow range makes you easy to play against is 100% wrong. It's just wrong. I could go for 20 minutes to try to explain it, but I know for a fact it's wrong because of my experience at the table, right? It also gives me extreme bluffing power, like nobody's business. Like so the way I play small pocket pairs in the early seats is I either open with them like normal, but if it's a really aggressive game, I don't want to play a 3-bet pot with the pocket deuces out of position, but I'm very happy to play a single raise pot. So if it's a very aggressive game, I'll limp, expecting somebody to raise, and then I call, and now the stacks are all right? But here's what happens a lot. I limp every single time I limp under the gun, I'm looking to 3-bet, 100% of the time, right? Because I can sell that story because they've seen me folding, right? So I limp with pocket deuces. Now, and somebody raises and a couple people call. So it's a perfect squeeze situation, right? All this dead money. And I go ahead and squeeze there. I 3-bet. Now, a lot of people, if they're playing normal ranges and you think, okay, here's a guy who mixes it up. He might have 10-9 of clubs or whatever. They're going to get action. But when they're looking at me and I make that 3-bet, I'll get called. But I know right then I am betting the flop. I'm betting close to a full-size pot bet on the flop 100% of the time. It doesn't matter what it is. And then now they're going to be faced with do I really want to pay off the biggest nit I've ever seen? Do I really want to pay off his 2 aces? Right? So I get away with murder because I play a very creative, aggressive game after the flop with my tiny range. And then on the button, my range goes all the way down to 6 deuce offsuit. So it's not really easy to play against a person who has a very, very narrow range from the blinds and under the gun if they play a creative game in poker overall.
That's good. That's good. Good challenging my thinking for sure. John, did you have something?
Yeah, this podcast is focused on RecPoker players.
Right.
And one of the most important things that RecPoker players want to get out of poker is having fun.
Mm-hmm.
And most people equate playing hands to having fun.
Yep.
And you're talking about a good form of discipline here. So how do you change your attitude so that you are still able to have fun and enjoy the session, even though you're folding 93% of the hands under the gun?
Are you asking me, or are you saying how would I suggest that a rec player?
Probably either way. It's more important for how the rec player should do it.
So I get enjoyment out of playing tight. So I don't, my enjoyment, this is what I was saying before, the enjoyment that I used to get was from the thrill of the playing the hands and seeing lots of hands and seeing flops. Now I get a twisted sort of satisfaction out of not seeing flops. I know that. But that's just the truth. But in terms of for rec players, okay, everything I've been saying here is based on the premise of like, what would we do if we were going to try to make ourselves the greatest poker player we could, right? And then there's the realistic, this is where we are, what can we change? So I'm all for rec players having fun. I go down the Oaks. I was playing 1-2 the other day, and everybody's having a ball. And I enjoy that scene. I love it, even though I don't necessarily join in anymore. I don't know if I've gotten off point of your question or not. What was it about rec players?
Oh, just how do we, how are we able, or how would you think we should think about the game so that we can still gain the enjoyment out of it while still having the same discipline that allows us to beat the game?
Because I think to add to John's comment too, I mean, I love that question. I think it's a great question because we hear, at least I hear quite a bit at the smaller stake tournaments, hey, this is Texas Hold'em, not Texas Fold'em. And, or like, I came here to play. I put down my $75. I want to play hands. So right. I think, yeah, John's point is kind of like, well, how, for the people, for a lot of the people that are out there saying, well, that doesn't sound very fun to go play a 4-hour tournament and play 8 hands. Right. How do you still have fun while doing that? Or how would you recommend a recreational player do that?
Okay, well, I got to ask one more clarifying question. By fun, are you talking about the fun of the gambling itself, or are you talking about the camaraderie fun?
I just mean the mental discipline. So when a lot of times people get bored, they want to play the hand, they want to be involved in it, and it kind of takes a different, you need to have a different attitude, I think, in order to be able to fold and still find the enjoyment out of it. You find enjoyment in different areas. And that's kind of my question is, like, for example, you could just make a game like, how tight do you think I could be under the gun and still get action, or those types of things. And I don't know what they should be, but
no, well, I think you're onto it there. If somebody listening to this is like feeling like, hey, I want to start playing tighter, then yeah, make that the game so that you either win or lose that game by your own standards. I mean, that can be kind of fun to give yourself new challenges, whether it's eating, exercising, whatever. So if increased discipline becomes a game inside itself for someone, then that can be a form of fun and satisfaction when they accomplish it. The thing that I think is really fun about playing tighter out of position is that it makes your results go up and it creates more confidence. People see that discipline and it kind of scares people a little bit. And then they're going to react with a little more fear when you play hands against them. So I believe that the act of playing tighter out of position can make the game a whole lot more fun if one of the things that makes it more fun for you is gaining more respect from your opponents. I like the word experiment. It's a really good experiment that anyone can try, is just to basically take like 20% of their marginal hands, whatever that means to them, and just start folding them, out of position only.
So we've talked a lot about kind of the auto fold range and playing tighter. Mm-hmm. When you think about the it depends range, which is kind of everything else, how do you characterize that? I know this is like a whole coaching lesson and a series of lessons, but one of the things that I know I continue to try to resolve in my brain is there's seemingly a million different things that we are told that we need to consider. It depends on. Tournament situation. It depends on stack sizes. It depends on your potential opponents in the pot. It depends on their stack sizes. It depends on your image at the table. It depends on their perceived image of you at the table. It depends. And I get it, and that's why it's such a complicated game. And for the sake of trying to make it easier, do you have sort of a framework that you think about? Are there certain things that you give more weight to as you're making those decisions on your it depends range?
Yeah. I mean, this does get quickly complicated, but I do think there are ways to simplify some of the decisions when you can consciously know what the parameter is that should be the one that decides it, the decision, right? So like tournaments, for example, if you've only got a 15 BB stack or whatever, many of those decisions are player independent. It's based on stack size, position, and cards only. right? Those are some of the most relatively easiest decisions that a lot of people make correctly because they don't depend on the other stuff.
You can remove some of the factors from the equation. Yeah.
So one of the things that does come up with my clients where I think people, let's say, put more weighting on some variables than others in a misguided way. I think the one that doesn't get enough emphasis is stack size in general, in terms of where it should weigh into the decision. Okay. And what I mean by that is, like one of the things I coach live players on is to have a pre-hand routine, just like a baseball pitcher. You try to do the same thing every time. Now, one of the things I try to do is scan the stack sizes very quickly. And so the idea here is like, so let's say I'm playing 1-2 and my stack is 300, right? And I'm in seat 1 and the guy in seat 9 only has, 50, but I don't see it, right? So it comes around to me and, he makes it 4 and I make it, let's say he's got like 30. Okay.
Yeah.
He makes it 4 and I make it 20, right?
Yeah.
I would never choose that. I would never choose that number if I knew he had 4. This isn't a great example, but when you know the stack sizes all the time, you have to have that information to make the right plays, first of all. And second of all, you need to anticipate the all-in thresholds like a street or two early and start adjusting. This is in cash games, but it applies to deep stack tournaments, and start adjusting the bet size based on the pot size and the stack size. A lot of the stuff is about betting 3/4 pot, half pot, or whatever. I think that that's a mistake sometimes, because sometimes betting 3/4 pot is going to leave you with an awkward stack to pot ratio.
Right.
Where better planning would leave you with a full-size pot bet on the turn, let's say. Okay. So these are some of the stack size mistakes that I see a lot in cash games that can be fixed, back to your point, where it's like, what parameter should these things be based on? Stack size oftentimes is underused. Okay. But it's super complicated. And everybody's got their own style, in terms of how do you play the it depends hands, right?
Right.
I mean, that's what makes poker. I mean, I've worked with clients where they'll send me hands, and I'll be working with them 2 or 3 sessions, and I'll think I got a pretty good line on where they're coming from. And then they'll send me some hand that's like a totally different thing. And I'll be like, what were you thinking there? And they're like, I was thinking this. And I was like, wow, it's like I keep getting reminded that every single poker mind is unique. And every single poker mind is always changing.
Well, and kind of along those lines, I'm curious kind of your thought on this then. Is there, would you claim or would you believe that there is a right way to play Texas Hold'em? Or is it more about, knowing your personality, knowing your bent, and having a strategy that's, fully integrated and consistent, internally consistent? Like you can be a really, really good player as a loose aggressive player. You can be a really, really good player as a tight aggressive player. Or do you feel like there is kind of one right way, and whether that's GTO or not? What's kind of your gut in that? Where there's people that are saying, well, I want to play tighter, but boy, that's just not me, and that will kill me internally if I have to play tight. Or would you recommend that? Well, you still need to go down that road, or no, let's figure out a way that you can still be true to who you are and what you want to do and the enjoyment that you want to get out of the game, and figure out a good winning strategy within that.
Well, that's why it's important to separate, whether we're talking about the ideal perfect professional, what they would do to improve, and then what we do in the real world. Okay. But in terms of right way, wrong way, I mean, obviously there's a lot of different ways to play poker, but in terms of if somebody wanted to play in such a way that they were guaranteed to make money at poker for life, I don't, well, let me do a little sidetrack. Okay. I did a survey. I asked 5 professional grinders in Vegas, buddies of mine that play 1, 2, and 2-5. I said, what do you think is the loosest VPIP of anybody who's actually making a living in Vegas playing poker?
Interesting.
I thought that was a great question.
Great question.
And they came up with 30. In other words, these are 5 professional poker players who believed that if you play more than 30% of your hands, you cannot make a living playing poker in Vegas.
Did they all have different answers, or was it pretty consistent right around 30?
No. I asked for both ends. I said, what do you think the tightest is, and what do you think the loosest is? And the range was 15% to 30. They thought it's possible to make a living playing as few as 15% of VPIP, and it's possible to make a living playing as loose as a 30% VPIP, but nowhere outside either one of those ranges.
Interesting. And I know most of the people that are listening know what that is, but it's VPIP is basically the voluntary percentage. Yeah. Well, how many hands you're playing that you don't have to play? Yeah. How many hands you put chips in voluntarily that you didn't have to, you weren't in the blinds or whatever. So 30%, that's a pretty tight, right? Yeah.
And then the other thing is, I've been surrounded by professional poker players now for 30 years, playing poker with them. And I've never, ever known somebody who truly grinded out a living at poker who wasn't a tight player. Not one. That's all I can say on that.
Yeah.
So that's why with rec players, my suggestion is, you want to enjoy poker. You want to love poker. You want to get better at poker. Getting better at poker is part of the enjoyment. Start today by just folding more hands out of position, and then think of it as an experiment.
Do you think that translates to tournaments as well? The whole, the 15 to 30%, or obviously it changes as you get into different.
Oh no.
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. See, in a tournament, somebody could start out with a strategy on hand 1 that they're going to play 70% VPIP if they wanted, and that could be a viable tournament strategy. It truly could. So I know just enough about tournaments to know that it's an entirely different form of poker.
Yep. So you're talking cash game, which is equivalent to a lot of the deep stacks.
I'm talking about grinding for a living. That's why I have to keep specifying.
Right. Yep.
Grinding for a living in cash games, tight is right. I do believe. Tournaments, I just don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. No, fair enough.
All right, well, we are going to cut off the conversation right there with Tommy Angelo, and we will continue that next week. He was gracious enough to give us a longer period of time, but I do want to chop it up into a couple different weeks so these episodes don't get too long. So we'll continue it then. But as always, we are sponsored by Running Aces Racetrack and Casino. And thanks to those guys for sponsoring us. Thanks to the panel for joining us. Thanks to Tommy Angelo. Thanks to all of our guests who have been part of the show and made this just a super fun time of learning the game in the context of community. And hopefully all of you are enjoying this as well. Feel free to reach out to me with any comments, questions, concerns, ideas, suggestions, whatever it might be. Steve@RecPokerTraining.com. If you want to support what we're doing, feel free to go on to Patreon.com. You can go to RecPoker there, and you can support us for as little as $1 a month. Just sort of encourage us and to continue the work that we're doing. Otherwise, just enjoy it for free. Enjoy, get better, and make sure you tell me all of your great successes on the felt. So until next week, take care.